The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Katherine Victoria stepped down into the blazing afternoon sun of Republic, Texas, clutching her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white, wondering if the knot in her stomach was excitement or dread. After 3 months of correspondence and a journey that had taken 2 weeks from Boston, she had finally arrived to meet Thomas Nolan, the rancher who had promised her a new life far from the suffocating expectations of her aunt's boarding house. The year was 1876, and Katherine was 22 years old, determined to find her own way in a land that promised freedom she had never known. The driver helped her retrieve her trunk from the back of the coach, and Katherine stood there in her traveling dress, gray with dust and wrinkled from the journey, scanning the small cluster of buildings that made up the heart of Republic. She had expected Thomas to meet her here. His last letter, which she had read so many times the creases had begun to tear, had specified this exact date and time. But as the other passengers dispersed and the stagecoach rumbled away, no one approached her. Katherine waited, her heart beginning to sink with each passing moment. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel perspiration gathering beneath her collar. Finally, she gathered her courage and walked toward the general store, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The man behind the counter looked up from his ledger as she entered, and his weathered face broke into a polite smile. "Help you, miss?" "I am looking for Thomas Nolan," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was supposed to meet me here. I have come from Boston to marry him." The smile faded from the man's face, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. He set down his pencil and cleared his throat. "You must be Miss Victoria. Thomas mentioned he was expecting a bride. I am afraid I have some difficult news, miss." "Thomas passed away near about 3 weeks ago. Horse threw him during a storm, broke his neck. Was instant, they say. He did not suffer." The world tilted beneath Katherine's feet, and she reached out to steady herself against the counter. The man moved quickly around to support her elbow, guiding her to a wooden chair near the pot-bellied stove that sat cold and unused in the summer heat. "I am sorry," he said gently. "Real sorry. This must be quite a shock." Katherine could not speak. She sat there, staring at her hands folded in her lap, trying to process what she had just heard. Thomas was dead. The man whose letters had made her laugh, whose descriptions of Texas had fired her imagination, whose promises of a partnership rather than the subordination her aunt had endured, was gone. She had no money for passage back to Boston. Even if she did, what waited for her there? Her aunt had made it clear that taking Katherine in had been a burden, and now that she was of age, that burden was lifted. The boarding house had no room for another worker, not one who expected fair wages. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, more to herself than to the shopkeeper. "Well," the man said thoughtfully, "Thomas has a brother, Yates Nolan. He runs the ranch now, took it over when Thomas passed. Might be he could help you figure things out. The ranch is about 5 miles west of town, follows the creek road." Katherine looked up at him. "Could someone take me there?" "I have a little money, but not much. Let me see what I can do." The shopkeeper disappeared through a back door, and Katherine heard him calling for someone named Jim. A few minutes later, a young man appeared, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. After a brief conversation, Jim agreed to take Katherine to the Nolan ranch in his wagon. He helped load her trunk and carpetbag, and soon they were rattling down a rutted road that followed a narrow creek lined with cottonwood trees. The landscape was harsh and beautiful at the same time, so different from the carefully manicured parks and crowded streets of Boston. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a burning blue that hurt to look at directly. "You really came all this way to marry Thomas?" Jim asked after a long silence, his voice curious but not unkind. Yes, Katherine said simply. We had been writing for several months. He seemed like a good man. He was, Jim said. Everybody liked Thomas, always had a smile and a kind word. His brother, though, he is different, quieter, more serious, but fair from what I hear. Does not cheat anyone, pays his debts, takes care of his people. Katherine absorbed this information, wondering what kind of reception awaited her. Would Yates Nolan simply turn her away, give her money for a stagecoach ticket and send her back east? The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. The ranch appeared gradually, first the fences marking pastures where cattle grazed, then a barn and several outbuildings, and finally the house itself. It was larger than Katherine had expected. A solid two-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around at least two sides. It looked well maintained, the wood still showing signs of relatively recent whitewash. Jim pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and jumped down. Before he could help Katherine, the front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Yates Nolan was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of years of hard physical labor. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell slightly too long over his collar. His face was tanned and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day or two of stubble. But it was his eyes that held Katherine's attention, a striking gray-blue that seemed to look right through her. He wore dusty work clothes, a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and worn denim trousers tucked into scuffed boots. He stood very still on the porch, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. Katherine felt herself being assessed and found her spine straightening automatically, her chin lifting slightly. She might be in a desperate situation, but she would not grovel. "You must be Katherine Victoria," Yates said finally, his voice deep and measured. "My brother's intended." "I am," Katherine said, climbing down from the wagon without waiting for assistance. "I arrived in Republic today, expecting to meet Thomas. The shopkeeper told me what happened. I am very sorry for your loss." Something flickered in Yates's eyes there and gone so quickly Katherine almost missed it. Grief, she thought, carefully controlled but still present. "Thank you," he said. "Jim, help me get Miss Victoria's things inside." "Where do you want them?" Jim asked, hoisting the trunk onto his shoulder. Yates paused, clearly considering. "The guest room for now." He looked at Katherine. "You must be tired and hungry. Come inside. We will talk after you have had a chance to rest and eat." Katherine followed him into the house, and despite her emotional turmoil, she could not help but notice how clean and orderly everything was. The front room had sturdy furniture, nothing fancy but well made and cared for. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and the floor was swept clean. Through a doorway, she could see a dining table and beyond that a kitchen. A Mexican woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked to be in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "This is Señora Maria Garcia," Yates said. "She keeps the house and does the cooking. Maria, this is Katherine Victoria. She will be staying with us for a time." Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly and smiled warmly at Katherine. "Welcome, Señorita. You must be exhausted from your journey. Come, I will show you to your room and bring you some water to wash." Katherine followed Maria up the stairs, her legs trembling slightly from a combination of weariness and shock. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the pastures. Maria helped her with the trunk, then hurried away to fetch water. Alone for the first time since hearing the news about Thomas, Katherine sank down onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of her situation. She was stranded on a Texas ranch with no money, no prospects, and no way home. Not that home existed for her anymore. She pressed her hands against her eyes, willing herself not to cry. Tears would not help. A soft knock on the door brought her back to the present. Maria entered with a pitcher of water, a washcloth, and a towel. "There is no rush," she said gently in accented English. "Take your time. When you are ready, come downstairs. I will have food ready." "Thank you," Katherine managed. "You are very kind." Maria paused in the doorway. "Senor Thomas was a good man. We all miss him. But Senor Yates, he is a good man too in his own way. Do not let his silence fool you. He feels things deeply." After Maria left, Katherine washed her face and hands, then changed into a clean dress, a simple blue calico that was practical and modest. She brushed out her long chestnut hair and repinned it into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a young woman with green eyes that looked too large and a face gone pale with shock and exhaustion. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color back, took a deep breath, and went downstairs. Yates was sitting at the dining table, going through what looked like account books. He looked up when Katherine entered, and she noticed that he had washed up as well, his face clean and his hair damp, though he still wore the same work clothes. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. It was not exactly an invitation, but not quite an order either. Maria brought out plates of food, beef and beans and fresh bread with butter. Katherine realized she had not eaten since early morning and found herself suddenly ravenous. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and then Yates set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I suppose you want to know what I intend to do about you," he said bluntly. Katherine set down her own fork carefully. "I suppose I do, though I am not a problem to be solved, Mr. Nolan. I am a person in a difficult situation through no fault of my own." A flicker of what might have been respect crossed his face. "Fair enough. You are right, and I apologize. Let me rephrase. You came here expecting to marry my brother and build a life. That is no longer possible. What do you want to do?" "I do not have many options," Katherine said honestly. "I used most of my savings to pay for the journey here. I have perhaps enough for one stagecoach ticket east, but nothing left when I arrived. No family to return to, no job waiting. My aunt made it clear I was no longer welcome to stay with her once I reached my majority." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes studying her face. "Thomas wrote to me about you. Not often, but sometimes. He was excited about your coming. Said you were smart and brave, willing to take a chance on a new life. He was looking forward to having a partner, someone to build something with." Katherine felt tears prickling at her eyes but blinked them back. "He wrote similarly about his dreams for the ranch, for the future. I was looking forward to meeting him, to seeing if the connection we had in letters translated to real life." Yates nodded slowly, then seemed to come to a decision. He looked at her steadily, and when he spoke, his voice was firm but not unkind. "My brother made you a promise. He promised you a home, a future, a partnership. He is gone, but his promise remains. I will honor it." Katherine stared at him, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?" "I mean I will marry you," Yates said, "if you are willing. It would not be the marriage you expected with Thomas, but it would give you the security and home he promised. The ranch is successful enough to support a family. You would want for nothing in terms of material needs." "You are proposing to marry a complete stranger out of obligation to your dead brother?" Katherine asked, her voice rising slightly in disbelief. "I am proposing a practical solution to a difficult problem," Yates corrected. "For both of us. Thomas wanted a wife to help build this place into something lasting. I have the same goal, but I had not gotten around to finding a wife myself. I have been too busy trying to keep the ranch running. This would fulfill his promise to you and address a practical need here." Katherine pushed back from the table and stood, suddenly needing to move. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening landscape. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were almost painful in their beauty. "You do not even know me," she said quietly. "I could be terrible. I could be lazy or mean or dishonest. Thomas would not have chosen you if any of those things were true," Yates replied. "He was a good judge of character. But marriage," Katherine said, turning to face him, "that is a lifetime commitment. How can you make that commitment to someone you met only hours ago?" Yates stood as well, and Katherine was struck again by how tall he was, how solid his presence felt in the room. "I am not promising love," he said, his voice steady. "I am promising partnership, respect, and security. The rest, we will have to see. Many marriages have started with less and grown into something good." Katherine searched his face, looking for any sign of dishonesty or ulterior motive. All she saw was calm certainty and perhaps a shadow of the same loneliness she felt. "And if I say no, then I will give you money for passage to wherever you want to go and enough extra to get you settled," Yates said. "I will not leave you destitute, but I think you should consider my offer carefully. Where would you go? What would you do? Life is not easy for a woman alone, especially without family or resources." He was right, and Katherine knew it. The options available to her were severely limited. She could try to find work as a seamstress or teacher in some town, but those positions were scarce and poorly paid. She could end up in a factory or, worse, in the kind of establishment that preyed on desperate women. Or she could take this chance, marry this serious, quiet man and see if the life she had dreamed of might still be possible, just with a different partner than she had expected. "I need time to think," Katherine said finally. Yates nodded. "Take what time you need. You are welcome to stay here while you decide. No one will bother you or pressure you." That night, Katherine lay in the narrow bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through her tangled thoughts. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds and the distant call of some night bird she could not identify. She thought about Thomas, the man she had never met but had imagined so vividly through his letters. She thought about Yates, so different from his brother by all accounts, reserved where Thomas had been warm, practical where Thomas had been romantic. But there had been something in Yates's eyes when he made his offer, something that suggested this was not merely a cold business transaction for him. He had loved his brother, that much was clear. And he was willing to honor Thomas's promise, even at the cost of binding himself to a stranger for life. That took a kind of courage and integrity that Katherine found she respected. Over the next few days, Katherine settled into the rhythm of the ranch. Maria showed her around the house and introduced her to the workings of the household. There were 3 ranch hands who worked for Yates, men named Carlos, Pete, and Samuel, all of whom treated Katherine with polite respect. She helped Maria with cooking and cleaning, needing to feel useful while she wrestled with her decision. Yates was often gone during the day, working with the cattle or mending fences, or dealing with the 100 other tasks that running a ranch demanded. But in the evenings, he would return to the house, wash up and join Katherine and Maria for supper. After the first awkward night, he began to talk a little more, mostly about the ranch and the land. Katherine found herself watching him when he was not looking, trying to understand the man who had made her such an extraordinary offer. He was not harsh or cold, as she had first feared. Rather, he seemed to hold himself carefully, as though afraid of letting too much show. But sometimes, when he talked about the land or the cattle or plans for the future, His face would light up just a little, and she would catch a glimpse of passion carefully controlled beneath his serious exterior. On the fourth evening of her stay, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sun set, Yates spoke without looking at her. "You are good with Maria. She likes you. That matters." "I like her as well," Katherine said. "She has been very kind to me." "She was very fond of Thomas," Yates continued. "She grieved hard when he died. We all did." Katherine heard the pain in his voice, barely acknowledged but there nonetheless. "You were close to your brother. He was 5 years younger than me," Yates said. "Our parents died when he was 15 and I was 20. I raised him as best I could, taught him the ranch work, tried to guide him. He was the better man of us, though, kinder, more open. People loved him easily." "I am sure that is not true," Katherine said softly, "about you being the lesser man." Yates looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gray-blue eyes. "You are kind to say so, but I know myself. I am not easy to be around. I am too quiet, too serious. I know what people say, that I am hard, cold. Thomas balanced that. With him gone, this place feels colder. Perhaps you just have not found the right person to bring warmth back," Katherine heard herself say, surprised by her own boldness. Something shifted in Yates's expression, softening slightly. "Perhaps. Have you made your decision?" Katherine took a deep breath. She had, though she had not fully admitted it to herself until this moment. "I will marry you, if the offer still stands." "It stands," Yates said quietly. "I am glad. I think we can make a good partnership given time." They were married 3 days later, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Republic. The pastor, Reverend Matthews, performed the service with Katherine wearing the best dress she owned, a green cotton that matched her eyes, and Yates in his Sunday suit, which looked slightly uncomfortable on his tall frame. Maria and the ranch hands attended, along with a few townspeople who had known Thomas and came out of respect for his memory. Katherine repeated the vows with a steady voice, feeling the weight of the moment. This was her life now, bound to this man, this place. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady and warm. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Yates leaned down and kissed her cheek gently, a gesture that was more formal than passionate but not unkind. Back at the ranch, Maria had prepared a special meal, and there was an almost festive atmosphere despite the strange circumstances. The ranch hands toasted the new couple with whiskey, and even Yates seemed to relax slightly, a hint of a smile playing around his mouth as he thanked everyone for their well wishes. That night, Katherine prepared for bed in the room that had been Thomas's, now hers and Yates's. Her hands trembled slightly as she braided her hair, wondering what to expect. The door opened quietly, and Yates entered, also dressed for sleep in simple cotton nightclothes. He stopped just inside the door and looked at her, his expression serious but not harsh. "I meant what I said about partnership," he said quietly. "I will not force anything on you. We can take our time, get to know each other. There is no rush." Katherine felt relief flood through her, though it was mixed with something else, something she could not quite name. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Yates nodded and moved to the other side of the large bed. They lay down together, separated by what felt like a vast distance despite the narrow space. Katherine could hear Yates's breathing, steady and even, and gradually she felt her own body relax. "Good night, Katherine," Yates said into the darkness. "Good night, Yates," she replied. The days turned into weeks, and Katherine began to truly settle into her new life. She took over more of the household management from Maria, who was grateful for the help. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, when the men would come in for meals, when supplies needed to be ordered from town, how to manage the household accounts. Yates trusted her with the books almost immediately, and Katherine found she had a head for numbers and organization. She also began to explore the land around the ranch house, always staying within sight of the buildings as Yates had requested. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, and she found herself falling in love with the big sky, the stark hills, the way the light changed throughout the day. In the evenings, she and Yates would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. She learned that he had dreams for the ranch beyond just cattle, ideas about irrigation and diversification that showed a sharp mind and creative thinking. He listened when she suggested improvements to the house or changes to the household routines, and more often than not, he agreed to her ideas. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wall between them began to lower. Yates started to smile more often, small expressions that transformed his serious face into something warmer. Katherine found herself watching for those smiles, pleased when she could coax one out with a comment or observation. One evening about 6 weeks after their marriage, Katherine was in the kitchen helping Maria prepare supper when they heard shouting from outside. She hurried to the window and saw Yates and the ranch hands running toward the barn, where smoke was beginning to pour from the loft. Without thinking, Katherine ran outside. The men were already working to get the horses out of the barn, and Yates was climbing the ladder to the loft, presumably to throw down hay bales before the fire spread. Katherine joined the bucket line that had formed, passing water from the well toward the barn. It was hot, exhausting work. The smoke burned Katherine's eyes and throat, and her arms ached from the weight of the buckets. But she did not stop, could not stop, not while their home and livelihood were threatened. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the fire was out. The damage was contained to one corner of the loft, and none of the animals had been hurt. Yates climbed down from the loft, his face black with soot, coughing. Katherine hurried to him with a ladle of water which he drank gratefully. When he handed the ladle back, his eyes met hers, and she saw something new there, something warm and wondering. "You did not have to do that," he said, his voice rough from the smoke. "You could have stayed in the house where it was safe." "This is my home too," Katherine said firmly, "my responsibility as much as yours." Yates reached out and touched her cheek gently, and Katherine realized his hand was trembling slightly. "You could have been hurt, so could you," she pointed out. "But we are both fine and the barn is saved." That night, after they had both washed and eaten and the excitement had died down, they lay in bed together in the darkness. Yates reached across the space that had always separated them and took Katherine's hand. His palm was rough from work but warm, and Katherine felt her heart skip at the simple contact. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for today, for staying, for trying to make this work." "You do not need to thank me," Katherine said, squeezing his hand gently. "I want this to work. I want to build something here with you." She felt more than saw him turn toward her in the darkness. His other hand came up to cup her face, and then he was kissing her, properly this time, not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding. It was a tentative kiss at first, questioning, but when Katherine responded, it deepened, becoming something more. That night, their marriage became real in every sense, and Katherine discovered that beneath Yates's serious exterior was a passionate, tender man who had simply been waiting for permission to let his walls down. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt more at home than she ever had in Boston. "I am falling in love with you," Yates said into the darkness, his voice vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. "I did not expect it, did not plan for it, but it is happening." Katherine lifted her head to look at him, wishing she could see his face more clearly in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It scares me a little. This is all so different from what I imagined." "Different bad or different good?" Yates asked, his hand stroking her hair gently. "Different good," Katherine said firmly. "So much better than I ever dared hope." As summer turned to fall, Katherine and Yates's relationship continued to deepen. They talked more, shared more, learned each other's histories and dreams. Katherine told him about growing up in her aunt's boarding house, about feeling invisible and unwanted, about dreaming of a different life. Yates told her about his parents, about the responsibility of raising his younger brother, about the loneliness of the last few years. "I threw myself into work," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "After Thomas started courting that girl in town, Jenny Franklin, I thought he would marry her and then I would be truly alone. But she broke his heart, married a banker's son instead. Thomas was devastated. That is when he decided to look for a mail-order bride, someone who would not care about his lack of polish or the roughness of ranch life." "I am glad Jenny Franklin was a fool," Katherine said, and was rewarded with one of Yates's rare, full smiles. "So am I," he said. "Though I wish Thomas could have found happiness. He deserved it." "He is the reason we found each other," Katherine said softly. "In a way, he gave us both a great gift." Yates pulled her closer, and Katherine settled against his side, feeling safe and content in a way she had never experienced before. This was love, she realized, not the wild passion of novels, but something deeper and more real, built on respect and partnership and growing affection. In October, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. They had not discussed children yet, though of course it was an expected part of marriage. Yates's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, wonder, and finally joy so pure it made Katherine's eyes sting with tears. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as though she had suddenly become made of glass. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Our baby. Katherine, I am so happy. I never dared hope for this, for any of this." "Are you ready to be a father?" Katherine asked, pulling back to search his face. "I do not know," Yates admitted honestly, "but I will do my best. I will love our child the way I love you, completely and without reservation." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Katherine continued to manage the household, though Yates and Maria both fussed over her, trying to make sure she did not overwork herself. The ranch hands treated her with even more respect, tipping their hats when she appeared and jumping to help with any task she attempted. In March, Katherine went into labor. Maria sent Pete racing for the doctor in Republic, while she and Yates helped Katherine upstairs. The labor was long and hard, lasting nearly 20 hours, and Yates refused to leave Katherine's side despite Maria's suggestions that he wait downstairs, as was customary. "I am staying," he said firmly, holding Katherine's hand as she gripped it hard enough to hurt during a contraction. "She needs me, and I am not leaving her." Finally, as dawn was breaking, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Jennings placed the squalling infant in her arms, and Katherine looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face with overwhelming love. Yates leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears he did not bother to hide. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Katherine, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked, exhausted but happy. Yates was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thomas, if you are agreeable." "In honor of my brother." Katherine nodded, feeling the rightness of it. "Thomas Yates Nolan. He would have liked that." Baby Thomas was a good child, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Yates proved to be a devoted father, often taking the baby with him around the ranch in a sling Maria fashioned, talking to his son about the land and the cattle and everything they were building together. Katherine recovered from the birth and settled into motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else. She nursed Thomas, cared for him, managed the household, and still found time to help Yates with the ranch accounts and planning. Life fell into a rhythm that was satisfying and full. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management and Katherine's organizational skills. They hired 2 more ranch hands, built an addition onto the barn, and began the irrigation projects Yates had dreamed about. When Thomas was 2 years old, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier and the labor shorter. She gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1879, a beautiful girl they named Violet Marie, Marie after Maria, who had become like family to them both. Yates was as devoted to his daughter as he had been to his son, cradling her tiny body against his broad chest and singing to her in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Katherine would watch them together and feel her heart overflow with love for this man, who had taken her in when she was lost and given her more than she had ever dreamed possible. One evening, when Thomas was 4 and Violet was 2, Katherine and Yates sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. It was a warm summer night, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Yates had his arm around Katherine, and she leaned against him comfortably, at peace. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Yates asked quietly. "How you came here expecting to marry my brother, and instead you got stuck with me?" Katherine turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability that still sometimes surfaced in his eyes. "I do not think about being stuck with you," she said firmly. "I think about how lucky I am, how blessed we both are. I loved Thomas through his letters, loved the idea of him. But I love you, the real you, the man you are every single day. That is deeper and truer than anything I could have had with him." Yates kissed her then, a kiss full of love and gratitude and passion that had only grown stronger with time. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and said, "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children. Everything I have, everything I am is better because you are in it." "We built this together," Katherine said. "That is what makes it special. We chose each other every single day, even when it was hard or confusing or frightening. That matters more than how we started." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch work and followed his father everywhere. Violet was more outgoing, with her mother's quick mind and her father's determination. In 1882, Katherine gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel James, and 2 years later, a second daughter, Rose Elizabeth. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and laughter and noise filled rooms that had once been silent and somber. Maria remained with them, growing older but no less essential, helping to raise the Nolan children with the same love and care she had once given to Thomas and Yates themselves. Katherine and Yates's love deepened with each passing year, weathering the normal trials of life, crop failures and cattle diseases, injuries and illnesses, the challenges of raising children. Through it all, they stood together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Katherine with a gift. It was a beautiful silver locket, engraved with their initials and the date they married. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of her and one of him. "So you will always have me close to your heart," Yates said as he fastened it around her neck. "The way you are always close to mine." Katherine touched the locket, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "You old romantic," she teased gently. "I knew you had it in you." "You brought it out," Yates said seriously. You brought out everything good in me. Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. You made me come alive." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they made love slowly and tenderly, reaffirming the bond that had begun so unexpectedly, but had grown into something unshakable. In 1888, when Katherine was 34 and Yates 39, they welcomed their fifth and final child, another son they named David Peter. By then, young Thomas was 12 and already a capable ranch hand, learning everything his father could teach him. Violet was 10, clever and quick, helping her mother manage the increasingly complex household and ranch accounts. Life was full and rich and sometimes chaotic, but Katherine would not have changed any of it. She had found her place, her purpose, her home. The frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Republic so many years ago was gone, replaced by a confident, capable woman who knew her own strength and worth. One summer evening in 1890, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Katherine sat on the porch with Yates, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Violet to rope a fence post, while the younger children ran around them, laughing and shouting. "We did good," Yates said quietly, taking Katherine's hand. "Look at them. Look at what we built." "We did very good," Katherine agreed. "I still cannot quite believe this is my life sometimes, that I get to wake up every morning in this place with you, with our children." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I think about that day you arrived, dusty and scared and trying so hard to be brave. I was terrified, terrified of failing you, of failing Thomas's promise. But I knew I had to try." "I was terrified too," Katherine admitted. "Of you, of this place, of making such a huge decision when I was lost and grieving for a future that would never happen. But it was the best decision I ever made, saying yes to you, to this life." "I loved you long before I was ready to admit it," Yates said, a confession that still made Katherine's heart skip even after all these years. "From those first weeks, watching you help Maria, seeing how hard you worked, how you never complained or expected special treatment. You were so strong, so determined. I found myself making excuses to come back to the house early just to see you." Katherine laughed softly. "I thought you were checking up on me at first, making sure I was not shirking my duties." "I was looking for any reason to be near you," Yates corrected. "Every smile you gave me felt like a gift. When you finally looked at me with something more than polite distance, I felt like I could conquer the world." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to their children's laughter, feeling the warm evening breeze. This was what happiness felt like, Katherine thought. Not constant excitement or drama, but this deep contentment, this sense of being exactly where you were meant to be. "Mama, Papa, come see," Violet called out, and they stood together, hand in hand, to join their children. As Katherine walked across the yard with Yates beside her, she sent a silent thank you to Thomas Nolan, the man she had never met but who had brought her to this place, to this life, to this love. He had made a promise, and his brother had honored it, but what had started as obligation had become something neither of them had expected. It had become home. It had become family. It had become the kind of love that was built slowly and carefully, day by day, choice by choice, until it was as solid and enduring as the land itself. Young Thomas had managed to lasso the fence post successfully, and the children were cheering. Yates pulled Katherine close and kissed the top of her head, and she leaned into him, feeling his steady strength, his quiet love, the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The sun continued to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the Nolan family stood together, surrounded by the land they had built their life upon, held together by bonds of love that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, but had proven stronger than either Katherine or Yates had ever imagined possible. Years continued to pass in a steady, satisfying rhythm. Young Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing the same careful management skills as his father. He courted and married a girl from Republic named Sarah, and they built a house on the far side of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough for their own privacy. Violet proved to have a head for business that rivaled her mother's, and she managed the ranch accounts with such skill that neighboring ranchers began asking for her advice. She married at 20 to a lawyer from Austin named Michael Reeves, who was smart enough to see that his wife's abilities were an asset rather than a threat. The younger children grew and flourished as well. Samuel became a veterinarian, studying in Galveston before returning to Republic to set up a practice. Rose married a teacher and moved to Dallas but visited often with her children. David, the youngest, stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and older brother, 3 generations of Nolan men building something lasting together. Katherine and Yates aged together gracefully, their love only deepening with time. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1901, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of children and grandchildren, noise and laughter echoing through the rooms. At one point, Katherine stepped out onto the porch to catch her breath, and Yates followed her. They stood together, looking out at the land that had become so deeply theirs. 25 years, Katherine said wonderingly. It seems impossible. It feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and alone. You were never alone, Yates said, pulling her close. Not from the moment you arrived. I just needed time to find the courage to tell you so. Katherine leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure as it had always been. I used to wonder what my life would have been like if Thomas had lived. If I had married him instead of you. She felt Yates stiffen slightly, and she looked up at him quickly. But I cannot imagine it anymore. Cannot imagine loving anyone but you, building this life with anyone but you. You are my heart, Yates Nolan. You always will be. Yates's eyes were suspiciously bright as he bent to kiss her, a kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their younger years. And you are mine, the best thing that ever walked into my life, the answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, the family gathered on the porch and in the yard. Someone brought out a guitar and music filled the air. Katherine danced with Yates, then with each of her sons, then with her grandsons. She watched her daughters and daughters-in-law dancing with their husbands and felt her heart swell with joy. This was her legacy, she thought. Not just the land or the ranch, but this family, these people who loved each other and stood by each other. She and Yates had built something that would last long after they were gone, something that had started with a tragedy and a promise, but had become so much more. Late that night, after everyone had finally gone to bed and the house was quiet, Katherine and Yates lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, the same room they had shared for 25 years. I am tired, Yates admitted with a soft chuckle. Getting old, I suppose. We both are, Katherine said, snuggling closer. But it is a good tired, a satisfying tired. I would not change anything, Yates said quietly. Not one single thing about our life together, even the hard parts, the losses and struggles, they made us who we are. Neither would I, Katherine agreed, though I might have liked to skip that year the well ran dry. Yates laughed, the sound warming Katherine's heart as it always did. Fair enough, but we got through it together. Together, Katherine echoed. That is the word that matters most, is it not? We have done everything together. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Catherine's last thought before drifting off was how grateful she was for the twist of fate that had brought her to this man, this place, this life. The years continued to unfold gently. Katherine and Yates watched their grandchildren grow, attended weddings and christenings, mourned when Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. They hired Maria's granddaughter, Isabella, to help with the house, maintaining the connection to a woman who had been so instrumental in their early days together. In 1910, when Katherine was 56 and Yates 61, they took a trip that had been years in the planning. They traveled back east to Boston, so Katherine could show Yates where she had come from. They walked the streets of her childhood, visited her aunt's old boarding house, now run by someone else, and Katherine told Yates stories of her lonely girlhood. "I was so invisible then," she said as they stood outside the boarding house. "Just another mouth to feed, another pair of hands to help with the endless work. I used to dream of being someone important, someone who mattered." "You matter," Yates said firmly, taking her hand. "You matter to me, to our children, to everyone whose life you have touched. You are the most important person in my world." Katherine squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar warmth and strength. "I know that now, but it took coming here to you, to Texas, to learn it. I had to leave everything behind to find where I truly belonged." They returned to Republic after 2 weeks, and Katherine realized she had no nostalgia for Boston, no desire to return. Texas was her home now, as completely and thoroughly as if she had been born there. The big sky, the endless land, the particular quality of the light, all of it had seeped into her bones and become part of who she was. In 1915, war clouds gathered in Europe, and though it seemed far away, the effects rippled across America. Prices changed, markets shifted, and the ranch had to adapt. Katherine and Yates worked closely with young Thomas, who was now 40 and managing much of the day-to-day operations, to navigate the changing economy. "You taught me well," Thomas told his father one evening as they went over the books. "Both of you. How to be steady, how to think long-term, how to weather storms." Yates clasped his son's shoulder, pride evident in his face. "You have made this place into something even bigger than I dreamed. When your Uncle Thomas and I first started building this ranch, we hoped it would last. But you have made it thrive. We all did it together," Thomas said, looking at his mother. "Mama's management, your vision, all of us working toward the same goal. That is what made it possible." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. This was everything she and Yates had hoped for, a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren, built on the foundation of hard work, integrity, and love they had established. As they moved into their 7th decade, both Katherine and Yates slowed down, as was natural. They handed over more responsibilities to their children, but remained active in the ranch's management and in their grandchildren's lives. They had become the heart of the family, the center that everyone returned to, and their love story had become family legend. Their grandchildren would beg for the story of how they met, how Grandma Katherine had come to marry Grandpa Yates instead of his brother. Katherine would tell it with honesty, never shying away from the sadness and uncertainty of those early days. "But your grandfather honored his brother's promise," she would say, looking at Yates with eyes that still held all the love of their early years. "And in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift of my life. He gave me a home, a family, and a love I did not know was possible." On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916, the family threw another big celebration. This time, there were great-grandchildren running through the house, the latest generation of Nolans who would carry the family forward. Katherine and Yates sat in chairs of honor on the porch, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, receiving well wishes and tokens of love. Young Thomas, now silver-haired himself, stood up to make a speech. "My parents taught me many things," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled family. "They taught me how to work hard, how to manage land and cattle, how to weather difficulties. But most importantly, they taught me what true partnership looks like. What it means to honor a commitment, to choose love every day, to build something that lasts." He raised his glass. "To Mama and Papa, who created not just a successful ranch, but a family bound together by love and respect. May we all be as fortunate as they have been. Hear, hear." The family chorused, and Katherine felt Yates's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining as they had so many thousands of times over the past 40 years. That night, alone in their room, Katherine and Yates held each other close. "40 years," Yates murmured. "40 years since I promised to honor my brother's promise to you. It is the best promise I ever made." "It was not just about honoring him, though, was it?" Katherine asked softly. "You did it for me, too. You saw me, saw my desperation and fear, and you offered me a way forward." "I saw you," Yates agreed, "and I saw possibility. I saw someone strong and brave who deserved better than to be cast adrift. I wanted to help, yes, but I also wanted you to stay. Even then, before I knew you, I wanted you to stay." Katherine kissed him tenderly. "I am so glad I did. I am so glad I took that chance, trusted in your promise. You gave me everything, Yates, everything I ever wanted and so much more." They made love that night with the gentle tenderness of long familiarity, celebrating the bond that had sustained them through 4 decades of joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Afterward, they lay tangled together, comfortable and at peace. "You think Thomas would approve?" Katherine asked quietly. "Of us, of how things turned out, I think Thomas would be happy," Yates said with certainty. "He wanted you to be cared for, wanted the ranch to prosper. We achieved both. And I like to think he sent you to me on purpose, knowing somehow that we would be good for each other." Katherine smiled in the darkness. "I like that thought, that he was watching over us, helping us find our way." "I know he was," Yates said. "I have felt him with me over the years, especially in the early days when I was scared of failing you. It was like he was whispering encouragement, telling me to be brave." "You were brave," Katherine said firmly. "Taking on a stranger, making such a commitment, that took enormous courage." "It was the easiest hard decision I ever made," Yates replied, and Katherine felt him smile against her hair. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the memories of 40 years of shared life. Katherine's last waking thought was gratitude, profound and overwhelming, for the journey that had brought her from that dusty stagecoach stop to this moment, this bed, this man. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Katherine and Yates continued to be the heart of their family. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, welcomed new babies and mourned those who passed. They watched the world change around them, saw automobiles become common, electricity come to Republic, the ranch modernize in ways they never could have imagined in those early days. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They argued sometimes, as any couple married for decades would, but they never went to bed angry, never let pride or stubbornness come between them. They had learned early that life was too short and too precious to waste on petty disagreements. In 1920, Katherine and Yates celebrated their 44th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. Their children had offered to plan something big, but they had declined, wanting instead the simple pleasure of each other's company. "You remember the fire?" Katherine asked as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink. "The barn fire, all those years ago," I remember, Yates said, his voice warm with memory. I remember watching you in the bucket line, your face streaked with soot, your dress soaked with water, and thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. That was the night I knew I was in love with you. That was the night I knew too, Katherine admitted. When you touched my face and your hand was shaking, I realized you cared about me, really cared, not just as an obligation but as a person. It changed everything. It was always going to be you, Yates said, turning to look at her. In the golden light of sunset, Katherine could still see the young man he had been, serious and uncertain, offering her an impossible promise. From the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach, dusty and brave and trying so hard not to show how scared you were, it was always going to be you. Katherine felt tears on her cheeks but did not bother to wipe them away. I love you, Yates Nolan. I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it felt like not to love you. And I love you, Katherine Nolan, my wife, my partner, my heart. You made my life worth living. You made me into the man I always wanted to be but did not know how to become on my own. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. Two people who had started as strangers bound by obligation, but had become soulmates bound by choice. As the years passed gently into the 1920s, both Katherine and Yates felt the weight of their age more keenly. They moved a bit slower, tired more easily, but their minds remained sharp and their love undiminished. They spent their days in peaceful routine, managing what they could of the ranch work, spoiling their great-grandchildren, and enjoying each other's company. On a warm spring morning in 1925, Katherine woke to find Yates still asleep beside her, peaceful in repose. The sunlight streaming through the window cast shadows across his face, and she studied him lovingly, memorizing every line and angle as though she had not done so 1,000 times before. His eyes opened, and he smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," Katherine replied, reaching out to touch his face gently. "How are you feeling, old?" Yates said with a soft chuckle. "But happy, always happy when I wake up next to you." They rose slowly and went through their morning routine, a dance they had perfected over nearly 50 years of marriage. Breakfast on the porch, watching the ranch come to life around them. Reading the newspaper, discussing the events of the day. Simple pleasures that meant everything because they were shared. That afternoon, their children and many of their grandchildren came to visit, as they often did on Sundays. The house filled with noise and laughter, and Katherine felt her heart overflow with joy as she looked around at the family she and Yates had created. This was their legacy, not just in blood but in values, in the love and respect that bound everyone together. As evening approached and the visitors began to leave, young Thomas, now gray-haired and a grandfather himself, pulled his parents aside. "I want you to know how grateful I am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything you built, everything you taught me. This family, this ranch, it is all because of the choices you made, the love you showed." "We just did our best," Yates said humbly. "Your best was extraordinary," Thomas said firmly. He looked at his mother. "You came here with nothing, knowing no one, and you built all of this through sheer determination and love. You are amazing, Mama." Katherine embraced her son, feeling the strength in his arms, seeing the man he had become. "We built it together," she said. "All of us. That is what makes it special." After everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, Katherine and Yates sat together on the porch in the gathering dusk. Yates had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his strength, even after all these years. "I have been thinking," Yates said quietly. "About that day you arrived, about how terrified I was to make that offer to ask you to marry me. I had no idea if it would work, if we could make a real partnership out of such a strange beginning." "But we did," Katherine said softly. "We made it work because we chose to, every single day. We chose kindness and patience and love, even when it was hard." "Especially when it was hard," Yates agreed. He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes still as piercing as they had been in his youth. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine. You brought light and warmth and love into my life. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." "We made each other better," Katherine corrected gently. "That is what love does. It makes us more than we could be on our own." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and at peace, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that frightened young woman on a stage coach to this moment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and deeply loved. "No regrets?" Yates asked, as though reading her mind. "Not a single one," Katherine said firmly. "This life with you, our family, this land, it is everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. I am the luckiest woman in the world." "I am the lucky one," Yates insisted, kissing the top of her head. "You took a chance on a serious, awkward man who had no idea how to court you properly. You saw past my rough edges to whatever was worth loving underneath." "There was everything worth loving," Katherine said, her voice passionate. "Your integrity, your kindness, your quiet strength, your deep capacity for love that you kept hidden away until you felt safe enough to show it. You are a wonderful man, Yates Nolan, and I have been honored to be your wife." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool, then went inside hand in hand. They prepared for bed together, the routine so familiar it required no thought, and climbed into the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. In the darkness, they found each other, held each other, loved each other with the tenderness of a lifetime together. The years continued to pass, and Katherine and Yates grew older together, their love only deepening with time. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1926 with a huge gathering that brought family from across Texas and beyond. It was a joyous occasion, filled with music and food and dancing, a testament to the love that had created such an extensive and close-knit family. As Katherine stood with Yates, cutting the anniversary cake their daughters had made, she looked out at the crowd of beloved faces and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 50 years ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach into uncertainty and loss. But instead of the end she had feared, it had been a beginning, the start of the greatest adventure of her life. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked softly, his hand warm on her back. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Katherine said, turning to smile at him. "For Thomas, for the promise you made, for every day we have had together. I am thinking that I would do it all again in a heartbeat, even knowing how hard parts of it would be, just to end up here with you with all of this." Yates's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "As would I, my love. As would I." They danced together that night, slowly and carefully, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were unnecessary. Around them, their family danced and celebrated, but Katherine was aware only of Yates, his arms around her, his heart beating against hers, the absolute rightness of being exactly where they were. As the celebration wound down and the guests began to leave, Katherine and Yates stood together on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, Yates turned to Katherine and took both her hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Katherine asked, though she thought she knew. "For saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for building this beautiful life with me, for loving me even when I did not know how to show you how much I loved you back, for everything." Katherine reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "Thank you for honoring your brother's promise. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for making me your true partner. Thank you for 50 years of love and laughter and building something that will last long after we are gone." They kissed then, a sweet, gentle kiss that held all the love of 50 years, all the memories and shared experiences, all the joy and sorrow they had weathered together. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their cheeks, but they were smiling. "Come," Yates said, taking her hand. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow is a new day, and I want to wake up next to you as I have for 50 years, and as I hope to for many more." Katherine followed him inside, her hand secure in his, her heart full of love and contentment. As they climbed the stairs together, she thought about that young woman who had arrived in Republic so long ago, lost and frightened and grieving for a future that would never be. That young woman could never have imagined this, she thought. Could never have dreamed that such happiness, such deep and abiding love was possible. She could never have known that the serious, quiet man who offered her a marriage of convenience would become the great love of her life, her partner in every sense, her soulmate. But here they were, 50 years later, still together, still in love, still building and dreaming and hoping. They had honored Thomas's promise and in doing so had created something far beyond what any of them could have imagined. As Katherine settled into bed beside Yates, feeling his arm come around her in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing, she sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. For this man, this life, this love that had carried her through joys and sorrows, triumphs and trials. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Yates replied, his voice warm and certain. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together as they had been for 50 years. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and the land they had tended so carefully stretched out in all directions, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other, every day, for a lifetime. The story of Katherine and Yates Nolan became part of family legend, passed down through the generations as an example of how love could bloom in the most unexpected places. Their descendants would tell the story of the mail-order bride who came to marry one brother and married another, and how that marriage built on a promise became one of the great love stories of their family. And somewhere, perhaps, Thomas Nolan smiled, knowing that his promise had been honored and that his brother and the woman he had chosen had found in each other everything they needed to build a beautiful life together. A life of love, partnership, and devotion that lasted until their final days and beyond, in the hearts and memories of everyone they touched.